The lawyer's email came in at 9:14 in the morning, exactly 6 days before my sister's wedding. The subject line said, "Urgent. Venue contract requires your signature." I almost laughed out loud in my kitchen. 3 weeks earlier, my mother had called to tell me I wasn't welcome at Claire's wedding anymore. Not, "We're thinking it over." Not, "Let's talk about it." Just, "You're out." My own sister's wedding, and I was uninvited over the phone in a conversation that lasted 4 minutes. And now here I was, holding my phone, reading a message that started with, "We understand this is a delicate situation, but the venue requires the signature of all listed co-owners of the property before the ceremony can legally proceed." Co-owner. That was me. They needed me. They just didn't want me. Before we go deeper into the story, please take a moment to like and subscribe. If you have a second, drop a comment and tell me where you are listening from and what time it is there. It means more than you know. My name is Rachel. I'm 34, and for most of my life, I was the responsible one. The one who didn't cause problems. My sister Claire is 2 years younger, and she's always been the golden child. Prettier, louder, better at getting what she wanted from our parents just by pouting at the right moment. When our grandmother passed away 4 years ago, she left something unusual in her will. Not money split evenly, not jewelry divided up politely. She left me half ownership of a lakeside property called Miller's Point, 12 acres of land with an old restored barn on it that had, over the last few years, become one of the most requested wedding venues in the state. My grandmother left the other half to my mother, actually, not to Claire. But Claire had spent 2 years planning her dream wedding at that barn, posting about it online, telling every relative who'd listen that she was getting married at the family property. Nobody ever mentioned that the family property needed 2 signatures to book anything. Nobody ever asked me if I minded. I didn't mind, actually. I loved that Claire wanted to get married somewhere that meant something to our family. I signed the initial venue paperwork without hesitation 8 months ago. I even offered to help pay for the flowers. Then, 3 weeks before the wedding, I found out my ex-boyfriend Daniel, the one who cheated on me 2 years ago and I never fully told my family the real story about, was going to be Claire's fiancé's best man. And apparently, according to my mother, my attitude issues and my inability to be mature about the past made me too much of a liability to have around during wedding week. I want to be clear. I never said one negative word about Daniel to Claire's fiancé. I never made a scene. I found out he'd be there, and I asked Claire gently if she'd talk to her fiancé about maybe not putting Daniel in the wedding party, just so it wouldn't be awkward for me. That was it. That was my crime. 2 days later, my mother called and told me I was uninvited. Not just from the wedding party, from the wedding, entirely. I sat with that for a long time. I didn't scream. I didn't call anyone crying. I just sat in my apartment and thought about every family event I'd shown up to for Claire over the years. Every recital, every birthday, every time she needed someone to co-sign something or vouch for her or bail her out of a bad roommate situation. I'd always been there, and this was the thanks. Uninvited from her wedding because keeping the peace with a man who humiliated me was more important than keeping me in the room. I didn't fight it. I didn't beg. I sent my mother one text, "Understood. I hope the wedding is everything Claire wants." Then I muted the family group chat and went on with my life. What none of them seemed to remember, in the chaos of dress fittings and seating charts, was the paperwork. The venue contract for Miller's Point required both listed owners to sign off on any event held there. A clause my grandmother had put in herself, specifically so that no one person could use the property without the other's knowledge. My mother had signed the initial booking 8 months ago. But the final contract, the one that legally authorized the ceremony date, the vendor access, the liability coverage, that one needed my signature too. And in all the wedding chaos, nobody had checked whether it was already filed. It wasn't. The email from the venue's lawyer explained it plainly. Without my signature, the contract wasn't valid. Without a valid contract, the venue couldn't legally allow vendors on site, couldn't provide insurance coverage for the event, and This was the part that must have sent my mother into a full panic. Couldn't guarantee the date wouldn't be released back into general booking. 6 days before the wedding. 200 guests already confirmed. A venue that, legally, might not be theirs to use. I didn't respond to the lawyer right away. I sat with the email open for 2 full days. I thought about being petty. I thought about letting the deadline pass just to watch it all collapse. I won't pretend that thought didn't cross my mind. I'm human, and I'd been humiliated by people who were supposed to love me unconditionally. But that's not who I wanted to be. Not because they deserved my grace, because I did. I didn't want to be the reason a wedding fell apart, even one I wasn't welcome at. That's not strength. That's spite. And spite has a way of costing you more than it costs anyone else. So, on the 3rd day, I called the lawyer myself. I told her I'd sign, but I had one condition. I wanted a single short letter attached to the file, addressed to Claire and my mother, stating plainly that the venue was only usable because of a signature they'd forgotten they needed from someone they'd already decided didn't matter. Not for revenge. For the record. The lawyer delivered the paperwork that same afternoon. I heard later, from my aunt, who wasn't afraid to still talk to me, that when my mother opened that file and realized whose signature had quietly made the whole wedding possible, the room went very, very quiet. Claire called me that night. Not a text. A call. She didn't apologize for uninviting me, not at first. She started with, "I heard you signed it," like she was testing the water. I told her yes, I signed it, because I wasn't going to let her lose her wedding over something that had nothing to do with her fiancé's best man and everything to do with our mother's decision. There was a long pause. And then she asked the question I think she'd been avoiding for 3 weeks. Why didn't you just say no? I told her the truth, because I'm not the kind of person who burns things down to prove a point. But that didn't mean I was going to pretend it didn't happen either. I didn't go to the wedding. That part didn't change. But 2 days before the ceremony, my mother called, not Claire, my mother. And for the first time in 3 weeks, she didn't lead with an excuse. She said she'd realized, looking at that letter, that she'd let Claire's comfort matter more than my dignity, and that it wasn't fair, and that she was sorry. I don't know if that apology would have come without the paperwork forcing the conversation. Maybe it would have. Maybe it wouldn't have. I try not to spend too much energy wondering about the version of events where I never got the chance to find out. What I do know is this. Claire got married at Miller's Point, on the date she wanted, in the barn our grandmother left to both her daughter and her granddaughter, because the granddaughter she tried to erase from the guest list was still, on paper and in practice, half the reason any of it was possible. They didn't want me in the room. But they needed my name on the page. And in the end, that told me everything I needed to know about where I actually stood. And exactly how much grace I was willing to give people who'd forgotten I ever mattered. I signed my name. Not because I owed them peace, because I wasn't going to let their smallness make me small too.